So Alvin and the Chipmunks is probably a series which strikes terror into the hearts of people, which is fitting for Halloween, but that's not why I'm doing this video. Instead I want to talk about the two Universal Halloween films they starred in at the turn of the millennium. Why do I want to talk about these two films? Because I like them, and that's why I do anything on this channel. It's also the week of Halloween and so it fitted. But anyway, the films. So I was one of those people who grew up when Alvin and the Chipmunks returned with their live action films, but those never stuck with me, and instead these did, with them becoming a Halloween tradition of 2 years, which is counting this one, which is yet to come at this point of recording. But the point at hand is that I like these films, and so I wanted to talk about them. Okay, more so I like one of them, but I have to do the other one if I'm going to talk about that one. So let's get into the first film, Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein. Meet Frankenstein, which I'm going to call it from now on, so I don't have to say the entire title, was the first film, released in 1999, and told the story of the Chipmunks meeting Frankenstein, if you haven't guessed already. But what you might not have guessed is that they spend most of their time with Frankenstein's monster. There's the obvious name joke out of the way. So there is more to it than just that, although I wouldn't say all that much more, as the film is horribly paced, but we'll come back to that. This film was my introduction to the 80s Chipmunks, and while I don't remember anything about watching it for the first time, it did stick with me enough to get the DVD, probably because it was in a shop rather than seeking it out. The film itself sort of acts out as a Chipmunk sequel to Frankenstein, with Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, later known as Frankie, being forced out of their home and ending up settling in an American theme park, which the Doctor can use as cover for his work. The theme park also happens to be visited by the Chipmunks, which is how their paths collide. The Chipmunks' introduction is really strong, and perhaps the strongest bit of the film, as they take over a bus tour and put on a bit of a show, much to the annoyance of the fame-seeking tour guide, and much to the praise and love of the passengers. Now this film has some pacing problems, and they unfortunately come up soon after this, as the Chipmunks get lost in the park and end up first finding the Doctor's laboratory, before getting chased by Frankie, and it's definitely the least interesting part of the film, as while we get some fun back and forth, it just feels very padded out. But once this is over, the film does feel a bit better paced, even if it does go a bit weird as it goes on with Alvin being kidnapped and becoming a monster, or a highly cartoonish cartoon. Admittedly, the plot is not the aspect of this film which stands out the most, and it has just sort of slipped out of my mind. So let's talk about the characters, as they are the strongest part of the plot. So beginning with Frankie, he is a very well used character. Obviously there's a lot of inspiration from the monster of the novel, and the many adaptations across the decades, and so the film has a focus on his innocence. This is introduced through his kindness with a twist on the reason he was chasing the Chipmunks, as it was because Theodore lost his teddy and he wanted to return it. This does mean the film has quite a heartwarming centre as the trio try to protect Frankie from the rest of the world, but due to the ending with the cartoony Alvin and the long start in the theme park, means this aspect doesn't really get all the time it properly needs to shine. Outside of the Chipmunks, there aren't really any other characters of note, with even Dave being somewhat forgotten about at times, and there isn't really anything notable about him here. Theodore is definitely the standout of the trio here due to his bond with Frankie. The two of them form a strong bond across the events of the film, and while it is somewhat limited by the bad pacing, it's still a good aspect of the story. Alvin of course gets his usual moments of ego, plus the cartoony stuff, while Simon is mostly there to be the wise one in terms of both intelligence and just trying to handle the situation with Frankie. This somewhat simplistic use of them doesn't mean they're at all bad, but they're just the lesser ones in terms of their development. Dr. Frankenstein is actually quite a fun character. He is very over the top, and you can tell he's evil at a glance, with him ultimately getting his comeuppance where he's trapped in the mascot outfit for the theme park, and forced to sing the song which he hates. Now for the Wolfman. So this is the one I wanted to actually talk about, as this is definitely the best of the two, and one of the best bits of Chipmunks material, if not the best. The film of course focuses on a werewolf instead, and uses that idea far more interestingly, mostly because it's able to hold back on it. So the Wolfman is the Chipmunks' new neighbour, who Alvin thinks is a werewolf because he's Alvin and jumps to wild conclusions easily, but it turns out to be true, which is played a bit like a twist even though it's obvious he's going to be. Although this isn't the only twist of his character, the other is that he's going to be their new head teacher, which given what happens at the end, it's surprising he didn't try to run away and hide. So the film doesn't just use the werewolf, and also plays around with Jekyll and Hyde in two ways, with their school putting on the production of the book, with Simon playing Dr. Jekyll, while Alvin was playing Mr. Hyde but was replaced by Theodore after an incident. But at the same time we have Theodore having that sort of double personality following being bit by the Wolfman. These two ideas work well together, as we have Theodore having confidence issues, and once he's bitten he's incredibly confident, although it's less confidence and more so ego. So while he isn't exactly going through the Jekyll and Hyde 2 personalities that are fighting for control, it's still there, but the Hyde is the dominant one. So like with the last film, there's a strong focus on Theodore, but this one is more about how he's affecting others while wolfing out, and what they end up doing because of that, rather than focusing on his impact on a singular person. This pushes the focus more to Alvin and Simon as they try and find out what's happening and then a cure. The pacing of all of this is much stronger than the previous film, with the film switching between several locations, most notably the house and the school, combining that with a far larger cast, and we get a film that has more going on, and so the plot has to use what time it's got wisely, which leads to both a much more interesting story, alongside that story being more interesting to watch. There's also a lot more heart in this one due to the story. As for one, Dave has a bigger presence, plus the scenes of the Chipmunks watching their brother transforming during the night and acting strangely during the day gives us a strong emotional core. Beyond that, we just have Theodore's arc where he wants to be confident and stand up to his bully, and this is what he seems to become, but it's all fake. His true confidence is demonstrated through his relationship with Eleanor and the necklace he gave her. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the Chipettes are in this one too. This is also what breaks him out of his wolf state towards the end and brings the plot to its closure, as he fights the Wolfman to defend her, which leads to the curse being broken for both of them. Even before Theodore's turn, Alvin is trying to prove their neighbour is a werewolf and forces Simon to help him, and so the plot naturally brings them into Theodore's story as they are both involved before it really gets going. The comedy is also a lot stronger here, with a lot of jokes mixed in with the strong emotional moments, which gives us a narrative which doesn't end up being overly serious. Now for the scores. So both films have soundtracks which consist of songs sung by the Chipmunks. Admittedly, I'm not the best sort of guy to talk about soundtracks, as music isn't my thing, and I just say it sounds good or bad to me, with a few exceptions. Now I definitely prefer the soundtrack of Wolfman, the music just hits far harder. While I'm useless at remembering the names of any of the songs, I do often find myself listening to some songs from that soundtrack after rewatching the films. It's not that the ones from the first film aren't catchy, but they're just a bit lacklustre and so don't stick with me at all, as well as one or two feel a bit tonally out of place. So the animation of these two films are great. They're very much in that nice in-between, between a TV series and a full movie budget, which allows them to be of a much higher quality so they can stand out against the TV series, but doesn't compare to the theatrical film from the 80s. Admittedly, this is a nice middle ground I've always liked, as it gives us incredibly expressive characters and great environments, but it's not as completely over the top as it could be. They look amazing, but you know there's always higher the animation can go. Now for the overall stuff. So despite their differences, they obviously share similarities. Notably their use of old horror characters for the villains and then twists them. These films don't aim for the lowest age group, going for an older child audience because of this. This means they're not the lightest of stories, with them being on the same level as a lot of the late 90s Scooby-Doo films where the monsters were real. There is a mystery element to the second one, but the first is quite simplistic by comparison, and I think the slight mystery helped to make it more interesting, but that's just one element of it. The films do present the Chipmunks in two different ways, with the first focusing on them as stars, with them being at the theme park for a concert, while the second focuses on them as normal kids. I admit this is something I've always found very strange, but it's just something the franchise does, although some eras will focus on one rather than the other, and so it's less peculiar. It's maybe just a bit more noticeable, as there are only two of these films. It's not something too important in the grand scheme of things really, so there's no point in making a big deal about it. Like I just did. So those were the Chipmunks monster films, a fun duology which gave us a fun spin to the traditional Chipmunks formula. I know the shows can get a bit strange, and so something like this is probably not all that far out from the normal for them, but for someone who isn't at all familiar with the 80s cartoon, finds this very unique. And for someone who really doesn't like horror that much, they're a great way into that genre, so I can enjoy aspects of it even if it's in a more kiddie form.